roiling public debate over the so-called campus rape crisis and whether sexual assaults are in fact endemic at American colleges. With little hard evidence available and strict privacy laws, it's an issue that's hard to draw bright, clear lines around, even for the New York Times. Reporting rape and wishing she hadn't was on New York Times front page blockbuster. It tells the story of Anna, a student at Hobart and William Smith colleges who was sexually assaulted just 2 weeks into her freshman year.
When I came forward, I felt so good because I was told that people had my back. They believed me and that the right thing would be done.
Anna agreed to go on the record as long as the Times withheld her last name. She told how she was gang raped at a campus dance hall and then filed a sexual assault complaint with school officials, only to wind up humiliated after a botched investigation.
The assault itself is bad enough, but then to have all this extra stuff afterward, it's not normal.
The Times portrays the college as a villain, but navigates much more carefully with the individuals involved. At one point, Anna is called a possible rape victim, but mostly the accuser. Those accused, the 3 football players, are not identified. They were cleared by the school, leaving Anna to fend for herself.
It was such a toxic environment that I needed to be home and try and find myself again.
Sadly, that's a process the Times can't help with. So I don't understand why the New York Times felt it couldn't name the names of the 3 accusers. I mean, or the 3 that allegedly committed the rape. Why? They're not necessarily victims. They were cleared. I mean, this happens all the time in stories about violence. Everybody's named. They were cleared. Good for them. But they're over age. I mean, I don't follow it. As for how they portrayed her, the accuser versus the rape victim, I think they could have come to their own conclusions. If that's what reporting, I mean, I realize the college cleared, but it wasn't a court of law. They could have come to their own conclusions and reported it. I mean, we did. It seemed as though pretty clear she was violated and stuff. So I understand they have standards and they have to work around these things, but I think they could have done it.
Well, this is a very awkward situation that they stepped into, where you don't have a criminal you didn't have a criminal conviction. Once they have made the decision not to name her, and we can debate that, but it's pretty standard that you're not going to name a victim of sexual assault. Then it becomes, well, are you going to name the people that she accused? And it just becomes a mess. So you end up not naming anybody. I thought it was a tremendous piece of work. I thought it was terrific journalism. What I wish they'd dug into a little bit more deeply is I'm uncomfortable with the whole notion that colleges and universities have this responsibility to almost act as a district attorney's office on these things, instead of just doing everything they can to get the case into the hands of the police as soon as possible. It seems that the system is now geared toward we're going to leave the police out of it and the university will take care of it. I'm not sure that's the best place, and I wish the Times had gotten into that a little more.
Well, that's what's going on across the country now. That's what those lawsuits are all about, because the colleges are not doing, and nor are they equipped to do it, as we saw in stark relief in this piece. And I thought the reason that they didn't name the people was if they weren't convicted, they wanted to this sounded to me like a lawyer saying, don't name them. Frankly, that's what it sounded like to me, just in terms of the Times' liability.
They weren't tried.
I'm just telling you, it just had a legal thing. I once got into a tussle with an ABC lawyer because I wanted to say it happened here, and it did happen there, but because of liability, he didn't want me to say it. I said, huh? But anyway, so that's what it sounded like to me. But I thought that what was very strong was just putting there what they initially said, how they changed their minds about what they said, and how they changed their minds again, right there for the reader to see. This is all messed up, and this is what's happening on campus after campus after campus, and that they're not equipped to handle it. Now, the question about whether or not she should be named, I mean, we often sometimes give people a first name, sometimes allow them anonymity in general, but put their faces on. So it just depends. We don't usually name sexual victims, but that's at all this is a case where she came forward and said,
and they basically said she was a liar.
Right.
Well, one thing I thought was interesting about it is that in one of the articles I read, they sort of supposed that maybe the New York Times just gave us her first name and not her last name, and used her picture so that she would be safe from being Googleable in the future. Sort of this idea that you can come forward and tell your story, but it doesn't have to follow you around for the rest of your life. So maybe they afforded her that privilege and afforded the players the same privilege, right? This idea that if they were cleared, and then every time you Google their name for the rest of their lives, this article would come up saying that they had been accused of sexual assault. So in some ways, I kind of understand that, but it is true. This story just makes my blood boil. I mean, it feels to me like they've made no progress since, my college days, which unfortunately were kind of a long time ago. So it sort of feels like it's exactly the same place it was when I was on a college campus. And I agree that the cops should handle it, but in that same article, there were a couple examples of cops who got involved in this case who completely botched this situation as well. It just seems like they're not.
But it was months later, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was months later. I mean, that's the problem. There's just such a mess, the situation. So.
This was a tremendous story, and kudos to Walt Bogdanich, who's as good an investigative reporter as we have, for doing it. What was terrific about it was that the willingness of Anna to come forward and tell her side of the story, as well as the access to documents that he had, enabled this story to go beyond lots of other similar stories, to really show every step of the machinations of the case as it proceeded through. I think Dan's point is a very important one, that essentially colleges have created this sort of shadow system of courts that operate without, the legal requirements of actual courts, and quite frankly, we journalists don't have the same standards. We kind of know how to cover something that happens in a courthouse. We know what our internal rules are. We don't really know how those apply in this sort of an environment. And there are 55 universities in the United States, including Harvard, my employer, who are currently being pursued by in a federal investigation about not paying enough attention to these sort of sexual assault cases. From my perspective, I don't see a way in which universities, as the sort of prosecutor, court, and jury, how that role makes sense. But it's understandable and all around.
They want to get right off their plate.
I do want to say that the reason that an Anna story can be told at its core is that she agreed to come forward, and that there are so many. This is the first time now in these last couple of years, and with the filing through the Title IX, that women have decided, okay, I'm just going to put it out there and allow myself to be Googled for the rest of my life and to be harassed for the rest of my life because it's important.